to local government services and revenue. So when we're looking at our objectives, we're to examine how local governments provide education, health, and public safety services, discuss how local governments provide utilities, understand how local governments control land use, and learn how local governments collect revenue to pay for services. If you look at the key terms, they're utilities, zoning, property tax, intergovernmental revenue, and grant. And then our main idea is that local governments provide a wide variety of important everyday services. Several sources of revenue help pay for these services. So in one town, a concerned mother wants the city council to ban skateboarding in public places. She feels that it is dangerous to pedestrians. A skateboarder disagrees. Instead, he wants the town to build a skate park for skateboarders. We ask local governments to help us in many ways. They often provide utilities or services needed by the public, such as water, gas, and electricity. They build parks, schools, and roads. They plan for community growth. Every time officials decide to handle a problem in a certain way, they are making policy. If the council bans skateboarding, it is making a public safety policy. Another policy might be to build a skate park. Policy decisions often depend on money. Because no government has all the money it needs, officials must decide which services to offer. The council might decide that it does not have enough money to build a skate park, but it will allow skateboarders to use an empty parking lot. Perhaps the park could be built if skateboarders were charged money to use it. Education, health, and public safety. Local governments provide many services that meet many citizens' needs, human needs. These services include education, health and welfare, and public safety. Education. The service for which local governments spend the most money is education. So remember, local governments and state governments spend the most money on education. Local governments, counties, cities, and school districts provide all public education from elementary through high school. Some also are in charge of two-year colleges. Local school boards build schools and hire teachers and staff to run them. Many local boards have a strong say in what courses will be taught. The federal and state governments are also important in public education. State officials set standards for school employees and buildings. State governments have a strong say in how schools are run because they pay about 1/3 or more of schooling costs. The federal government helps pay for buildings, school lunch programs, and programs for children with special needs. Local and state governments often do not agree about which of them should have greater control over state education money. State officials make sure that state standards are met. They also make sure that children in all school districts have equal opportunities. On the other hand, local control can be good for schools because local citizens know what the students need. Health and welfare. Millions of Americans are poor, too ill to work, or unable to find jobs or homes. Many people help the needy, but it is a very big job. Local governments play a part by offering health and child care to families that need extra assistance. Other local programs train people for new careers and provide low-cost places to live. Most programs giving public assistance or welfare are funded by federal, state, and local governments together. However, local officials carry out the programs. The city of Atlanta, Georgia, for example, was recently recognized for its success in making use of federal funds to improve low-cost public housing in several Atlanta neighborhoods. Communities also look after public health. In many cases, local officials carry out state health laws. Local health officials inspect restaurants, markets, hotels, and water to be sure that state and federal standards are met. Many communities also ensure that federal and state laws to control pollution are obeyed. Public safety. If you had an emergency, what would you do? You might call the police or fire department or dial 911. If you were witnessing a crime, the police department would send a police officer to stop the crime and speak with you about what happened. Other members of the department would follow up on the crime to recover lost property and bring the criminal to justice. If you called 911 to report a fire, the fire department would dispatch a fire truck to put out the fire, help people affected by the fire, and protect nearby buildings. In the case of a medical emergency, a local dispatcher might send an ambulance to help. The ambulance would bring the sick or injured person to a local hospital or medical center where doctors would treat the patient regardless of ability to pay. Police officers and firefighters also look after public safety in non-emergencies. The police help citizens stop crime by teaching them how to prevent people from breaking into their homes. The fire department checks for fire hazards, such as faulty wiring, and teaches safety rules to children. Local governments also hire people to make sure that safety rules, called codes, are followed. A fire code may say that all buildings must have smoke alarms. Building codes make sure that new buildings are built safely. What if no one paid taxes? Imagine you wake up one morning to a country where no one pays taxes. You can buy more because you don't have to pay sales tax. You receive more income from your part-time job because you don't have to pay state and federal income taxes. Your family can buy a larger house because property taxes don't exist. That sounds good until you notice that your school is deteriorating because the city has no tax revenue to pay for upkeep or electricity. What if you become ill and can't get treated? The local hospital has closed because without tax revenue to maintain the building and equipment, they wouldn't exist. Even trying to drive may be impossible because the city has no municipal tax revenue to fill the large potholes on the road. Taxes may sometimes be too high, and tax dollars are not always used wisely, but few people dispute that taxes are necessary. Utilities. You may not even be aware of some local government services. However, you would certainly notice if you no longer had them. These government services can include the utilities. Utilities is a term that describes such services as water, gas, electricity, sewage treatment plants, and garbage collection. In many cases, water and sewage treatment plants are owned and run by local governments. Communities often arrange for private companies to supply gas and electricity and to pick up garbage. The state makes rules to ensure that the companies deliver good services at fair rates. Utilities are best provided at the local level, where they can be planned to fit a community's needs. For example, in Imanok, Alaska, the ground freezes in winter, so sewer pipes are not put underground. Instead, sewer pipes made of materials that will not freeze are laid above ground. If utilities were provided at the state or federal level, these governments would not be well equipped to meet the different needs of local communities. Land use. In many communities, homes and businesses are in separate areas. This is the result of zoning, local rules that divide a community into areas and tell how the land in each area can be used. For example, zoning may keep a factory from being built next to your home. Zoning is a tool used by local governments to plan and control the growth of their communities. Things to consider. The people who plan communities think about where roads, parks, factories, and homes should be built. They must also think about how a new factory will affect the lives of people in the community. They must think about who will be using a park and whether it will need a playground or picnic tables. Will a new road bring too much traffic into the downtown area? Are there enough low-cost housing and apartments for families with low incomes? Planners must also look at how development affects the environment. Will the new factory have anti-pollution controls? The planning process. Planning is made up of many steps. A local government appoints a planning commission to set goals and get information about the community, such as its growth rate and types of businesses. Most commissions are made up of interested citizens, such as builders, environmentalists, and business leaders. Commission members work with a staff that looks at requests from builders and reads reports about what a proposed building might do to the environment. The staff tells the commission what they think should be done about each request. The commission decides what to do. Then it presents the matter to the city council or county board, which makes the final decision. Some of the most heated battles in land use planning are over how fast communities should grow. New businesses mean more jobs and more tax money. However, new businesses may bring in more people who will need water, schools, and parks. New businesses may also bring more traffic and pollution. The city of Reno, Nevada grew rapidly during the 1980s and 1990s. This growth brought thousands of new jobs and lots of tax money to Reno. Local officials pointed out, however, that quick growth meant the city would also need more water. Reno gets its water from the Trucker River. The city could make land use plans, but it could not make more water flow from the river. Planners must think about the resources they have as well as the short-term and long-term needs of citizens. Revenue, paying for services. To provide services to citizens, local governments need money. Like state governments, local governments depend on several sources of revenue. Taxes. About 25% of local government revenue comes from a property tax, a tax on land and buildings. The county assessor decides how much the property is worth. He or she charges the property owner a fixed percentage of that value. Many people feel that a property tax is fair because the more property that citizens own, the more services such as water and fire protection they use. Some communities bring in money through other taxes, such as local sales tax. About 3,300 local governments in more than a dozen states put an income tax on the salaries of people who work there. The idea is to collect money from people who use city services during the workday, but live somewhere else. Service charges and profits. Cities often charge money for certain services, such as inspecting buildings to see that they meet safety codes. Communities also get money from bridge tolls, park entrance fees, and parking meters. Some local governments make money by running businesses. For instance, the city of Naperville, Illinois, runs a parking garage. It brings in money while providing parking spaces for people who work and shop in the city. Government-owned utilities, such as electric companies, also bring in money and give low-cost services to local citizens and businesses. Borrowing. When revenue from taxes, fees, and city-owned businesses is not enough to cover their costs, local governments can borrow money. For short-term needs, they may borrow from banks to pay for big projects, such as school buildings. Communities borrow money by selling bonds. Sharing revenue. Intergovernmental revenue, or money given by one level of government to help another, is another source of funding for local governments. Federal and state governments often give money to local communities. This money is called a grant. Grants are a way to make sure that services of national and state importance are provided at the local level. Some grants are for special uses, such as a summer job program for youth or large building projects. Others are block grants for general uses, such as education. Block grants allow local officials to decide how best to use the money. And if you remember before, we had categorical grants, and those grants have to be for something specific, like the water treatment plant. Limits on revenues. Most communities face problems in paying for services. The demand for services is generally greater than the money available to the community to pay for them. Sources of money may run dry or run out. Another problem is that the power to tax is controlled by the state. The state determines which taxes may be collected and how the money may be used. Large cities can have a particularly difficult time balancing the money in the city treasury with the need for services. Former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown Jr. discussed this challenge when presenting his yearly budget to the people of San Francisco. Confronted with the harsh realities of a struggling national economy, a catastrophic state budget crisis, and severely diminished local tax revenues, my administration set out to craft a balanced spending plan that protects the people of San Francisco and lays out the groundwork for economic recovery. All right, so that's it for Chapter 12.